And now on AuthorTube for your viewing pleasure, Nicola Monaghan.
Thank you, good husband, for that lovely introduction. So, as my good husband just said, my name's Nicola Monaghan. I'm an author from Nottingham in the UK, and I'm about to do my AuthorTube newbie tag.
How did you find out about AuthorTube? How did you find out about AuthorTube? Did you find out about AuthorTube?
I'm going to blur all my makeup. So I've been on YouTube for ages, for 5 years, and I didn't find out about AuthorTube until about a year ago when I heard about it at a conference. And then I looked at AuthorTube, I had a quick look and I thought, God, everyone's so young and so confident and so cool. I thought maybe it's not for me. And then I did some more searching on YouTube and found out more about you and looked at the whole range of AuthorTubers and realised that actually you're a very diverse community with lots of different types of people and different voices. So I decided that I did have stuff to say. I've been published for 14 years. I've been teaching creative writing for quite a long time as well. And I thought, actually, I've got something to give to this community and to YouTube and to AuthorTube. So here I am.
Which genres do you write in?
So I mostly write crime and thrillers. I do change a bit. I'd like to say that I am genre fluid. So I do play with different genres. And at the end of the day, I don't sit down and I think, I'm a crime writer, therefore I'm going to write crime. I actually go with the flow a little bit. So it depends on the story and what is actually interesting me at the time. I've written ghost stories, I've written literary fiction, I've written all sorts of things. I guess the one thing that really does unite all of them is that they tend to be quite dark stories. So I'm a writer of dark fiction if I had to define myself.
What is your preferred writing tense, point of view and category of story?
I tend to write in the very typical third-person objective point of view that is really common in modern fiction. I like that point of view. I like to read those kind of stories. But I don't really stick to that 100%. So my first novel, for example, was written in first person. It was written in dialect, so it was really quite different from that. And it had a bit of an unreliable narrator. It really depends on the story and whose story it is and what kind of narrator makes sense for that story. So it really changes from one to the next. But really most of the time I do tend to use that third person objective because I think it's really clean. And so then the reader can focus on the story rather than being drawn out of the story by thinking about things like, oh, this is first person. And what does it mean? Is someone talking to me? So yeah, generally third person objective.
Are you a plotter, pantser or plantser?
So plantser, well, that is not a word I'd come across before I came across AuthorTube, but I'm really glad I did because it's one of the best things ever. It absolutely describes my process. I do tend to start by just writing and I just splurge on the page for probably about 10,000 words. And then I start to plan and I do quite a lot of planning and I use Scrivener, that's my favourite tool to write with. And I will do index cards and I'll do character profiles and I'll do all sorts of that planning stuff. And then I'll do a load of writing again. And then I'll decide that the story's getting really messy and I'll do a load of planning again. So absolutely, plantser really, really sums it up. So I'm really glad that I've come across that word. So thank you, AuthorTube, for giving me the right word to describe my writing process.
Are you self-published, published or yet to be published?
So I am published by a traditional publishing house, and in fact my first publishing deal was with one of the big five, Penguin Random House. However, I am also self-published because along the way I've had a really interesting journey, all sorts of things have happened, and one of the reasons I decided to try self-publishing actually is because I also teach creative writing, and it's one of the things I ask my students to do, so it seemed only fair that I had to go myself so I could genuinely teach them about it, having an idea of what goes into self-publishing and knowing what they need to know. I have to say, I really admire you guys who do this full time, who do all of that work in terms of managing your own books and managing all the publicity and all the promotion around that. Now I have another traditional publishing deal because I'm just too lazy for all that self-publishing work.
What publishing company, literary agent and or printing company are you represented by or do you use?
Right, so I don't have a literary agent at the moment for my novels, which is a new thing, and also a very long story, so I probably won't do a YouTube video about that, but there you go. So if there are any literary agents watching this, by all means get in touch. I do have an agent for my script and adaptation stuff, and that is Mark Cassarotti. I found an agent for that side of things because recently I've needed to. Hopefully I'll do another video on that in the near future when things are fully confirmed. I also have a publishing company who I work with called Verve, and they're quite a small publishing company, which has been a lot of fun because when you work with a small publisher, they really make you feel special. I actually found it a really, really good experience. And that's at least partly because the people at Verve are so nice. I've really, really enjoyed working with them. So I definitely recommend the small publisher experience.
What AuthorTube related videos can we expect to find on your channel?
I already have quite an active channel where I do a lot of more teaching stuff because I am a teacher of creative writing, and that stuff's likely to carry on. I'm likely to do lots of videos about craft and about writers and advice and that kind of thing. But I also want to do more stuff that is typical of AuthorTube, so stuff that's got a bit more of a vloggy style, more me talking to the camera, talking about my writer's process. One of the things you probably will see tuning into my channel is some dog related videos because I have 2 dogs and I often use them as my YouTube assistance dogs. You're definitely likely to meet Bongo and Elvis, my YouTube assistance dogs, somewhere along the way. I've really enjoyed watching your videos where you're spilling tea or where you're doing harsh writing advice, that kind of thing. I probably won't do those videos myself because being really English, we get really embarrassed about doing things like that, but I have enjoyed watching them. But mine are more likely to be typically English and British and self-effacing, possibly a little bit daft at times, but hopefully entertaining and hopefully educational.
When did you start writing?
It is true, and a lot of writers say this, and so I was trying to avoid saying this. I have kind of written my whole life. I have dabbled with writing my whole life. I remember at university, I was doing a maths degree, so it was nothing to do with writing, completely different. But I do remember me and one of my friends, Kevin, if you're watching, thanks for helping me along the way. But we would write daft stories together. So one of the titles was A Cup of Tea and a Slob. And so it wasn't spilling tea like you guys do, but you know, it had a tea-related theme. We are English. I only started to get much more serious about it in my late 20s. I'd just been through a really bad breakup and it was one of those times where you think, yeah, it's time to change my life. So I started to take my writing much more seriously and I started to really think this is what I wanted to do. And then also I had another life-changing moment in 2001 where actually I had worked that year in the World Trade Center, and suddenly this office, I didn't work there all the time, I worked in Chicago as well, but suddenly this office that I knew and that I'd been in was blown up, and it was all very shocking, and it made me think about how life was really short. So that made me take it even more seriously again, and at that point I decided to do an MA in creative writing. So yeah, kind of been writing forever, but really dabbling. Been writing more seriously for about 20 years, which is ages. I hadn't realised it was that long.
What was the first story you ever wrote?
I don't think I remember the first story I ever wrote because that's probably in primary school. I know I wrote a lot in my first year of secondary school, which is high school. It's the English equivalent of high school. I wrote a lot that year. I remember I had a teacher who used to read the stories out. Don't really remember any of them, but I remember enjoying writing very much at that point in my life. The first story that I really remember writing was my final year of primary school, and I wrote a story. It was a crime story, funnily enough. I told you I'd always been drawn to the dark side. But it was a story about a boy that was abducted and how he was in the car blindfolded and he had to work out where they'd driven him to try and work out where he was. And I remember that my teacher read it out to the class and they really enjoyed it. It was my first experience of having an audience for my writing. So I had this thing at the end where people were coming up to me and saying, I really enjoyed that story. I wanted it to go on and on. Which was also a bit odd because I thought I'd finished the story. So I wondered why they wanted it to carry on. So yeah, it was my first experience of an audience and it was my first experience of feedback. One a slightly more positive experience than the other, I think it's fair to say.
Which authors have inspired your writing the most?
So I'm quite inspired by local Nottingham writers, which is the city that I come from. When I was younger, I was massively into D.H. Lawrence, who is from Eastwood, which is an area I know quite well. And I think that was at least partly because there were some places in his books that I actually recognised. But as I got older, I got into some different types of writers. So Alan Sillitoe was a big influence. And in fact, I was really lucky in that I met Alan Sillitoe and he really encouraged my career and we exchanged letters for a while. So that was amazing, one of my really proud writer moments. And then later crime writers from the area like John Harvey. I also like dark fiction. That's not going to be a surprise based on all the other things that I've been saying so far. But in my 20s particularly, I was massively into writers like Chuck Palahniuk and Irving Welsh, that kind of dark, literary, millennial fiction that was really big at the time. And that definitely had an influence on the kind of thing that I write. More recently than that, I've massively got into reading contemporary crime and dark thrillers. So authors like Tana French, Denise Mina, Harriet Tice, Sarah Pinborough, that kind of thing. Mostly women authors writing this really dark fiction. I absolutely love that. And they've been a massive influence on what I do.
Do you schedule your writing sessions or simply get to writing whenever you can find the time?
So I'm a really busy person. I teach full time and I do YouTubing just because obviously I'm not busy enough. So I have to schedule my writing time. It's really important that I put time aside and actually sit down at my desk and do some writing. But even if I wasn't that busy, I think it's really important to schedule your writing time. I think it's one of the bits of advice that I give to people starting out in writing, that if you go to your desk and sit down, the writing will happen. It might not happen straight away. You might spend a lot of time staring at a blank page. You might spend time staring out the window. That's all part of the process. But I do think it's important to sit down at your desk and try. And that's when the writing, the magic might happen. It's a bit like that film, Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. If you sit there at your desk, the words eventually, after a little bit of a struggle perhaps, will come.
Do you type on a computer, typewriter, write everything out by hand, or use a blend of those? And where do you write in general?
So I could never write on a typewriter. I think it sounds really cool and it looks really cool, but actually the effort of pressing those keys down would be a bit too much for me. So no, not a typewriter. I do tend to type stuff straight into the computer most of the time, certainly in terms of the actual words and sentences that go into the book. So yeah, that's my main method. I do often write by hand as well. Sometimes I find if I'm stuck, because it's a slightly different process, I'll write by hand and that will help loosen something up. My planning tends to be in notebooks and by hand, certainly in the initial stages, like when I'm outlining and when I'm doing character profiles and that kind of thing. Then I'll often put it into Scrivener afterwards. Scrivener's one of the tools that I do like to use for my writing. But yeah, so it is a bit of a mixture. But in terms of the actual words and sentences that go finally into the book, I tend to type them on the computer. Where I do it, well, this computer behind here is one of my big tools. But I also have a laptop, and when we're not on lockdown, I actually quite like to go to cafes and do some writing there with a cup of coffee. It's one of my favourite things to do. I write here, I write out and about, I write in cafes, I write in libraries. Sometimes I write on the train because I commute to work. Basically, I'm quite a flexible writer, and also I do find it quite stimulating to have different environments around me. So I do find that a change of scene can be really helpful. So often I'll move around during the day to find inspiration from just the process of being somewhere else.
What are you most looking forward to now that you're a part of AuthorTube?
So what am I most looking forward to? I guess just being part of a community and getting to know you guys a bit better and interacting a little bit with some of the tags and the to and fro that I've seen going on. I'm also looking forward to trying some new types of videos, so maybe stuff like this where there's a bit of a Q&A going on and more vlog type content, basically just really engaging with everything that you're doing here and becoming part of it. So yeah, I'm dead excited, really looking forward to it.